Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Hey friends, welcome back to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and today we're naming something that way too many people carry alone: disenfranchised grief. That's the kind of grief that goes unrecognized, unsupported, or just straight up dismissed. The kind people don't send flowers for, the kind that gets side-eyed or minimized. And let me tell you, just because a grief isn't public doesn't mean it's not real. So in this episode, we're going to unpack what disenfranchised grief really actually is, the different ways it can show up, yes, including pet loss, estranged family, non-traditional relationships, and more, why this kind of grief can feel extra isolating, and how to validate your experience even when no one else does. So let's get into it. Disenfranchised grief is a fancy term for something heartbreakingly common. It's grief that society doesn't recognize as legitimate. You might not get a funeral, you might not get casseroles, heck, you might not even get a how are ya? And that is a kind of grief on top of the grief. Some common examples of disenfranchised grief include the death of a pet, pregnancy loss or infertility, the end of a relationship that wasn't public or socially acknowledged, the loss of an ex, a situationship, or an estranged parent, grieving someone who harmed you but still mattered, losses related to incarceration, addiction, or death by suicide. And yes, even the grief of identity shifts, chronic illness, or the future you thought you'd have. What do all of these have in common? Well, they don't fit the mold of what people think grief is, quote unquote, supposed to look like. Storytime with Heather. I've worked with a number of clients who have lost their person due to addiction. And there was maybe estrangement beforehand, or they'd been on and off the streets. And so it was a really inconsistent relationship as their person continued to grow. And then they ended up dying from overdose. And it's so tricky navigating the complicated feelings there and navigating people's reactions and responses to losing someone from addiction. And some people can say some really shitty things. We already know this. Just the line that's circling through my head is, well, if they were using drugs, so it's not like I wanted to be around them. And remembering how jarring that felt to hear that, how dismissive, how only focusing on 1% of a person and their choices. And it was so dehumanizing, so minimizing of the life, the roles, the relationships that this person had. And yes, there were hard things about this type of loss, and it's still grief. We are still sad they're not here. We're sad there's not a chance for repair, for finding sobriety, figuring out what that means, for continuing relationships, for them moving through it, for becoming not estranged anymore. It's so messy, and society does not know how to hold space for this. I mean, we already know this. Society's not great at holding space for grief in general, let alone when there's extenuating circumstances or complications, especially related to addiction, because people make assumptions about addicts, and it's not kind or fair or supportive. And so trying to navigate deeply painful grief for your person, society just doesn't even want to acknowledge it. Or if you share how they died, because it's usually the follow-up question after, oh, my person died, so I'm taking some bereavement leave, they're gonna usually ask, well, what happened? How did they die? And you want to protect your person, right? You don't want to open them up to judgment and misperceptions based on what people make assumptions around addictive behavior. And so that can double down on those isolating feelings of grief, because you're wanting to protect them and not have someone just focus on that 1% of who they were. It's tough. And this is just one example, right? There's so many other ways that grief shows up within disenfranchised situations. So the grief is already there. That's hard enough. But when no one validates it, when people ignore it or worse, judge it, that's when the real loneliness creeps in. And you end up asking yourself, am I overreacting? Do I even have a right to feel this way? Why does this hurt so much if it, quote unquote, wasn't a big deal? Spoiler alert, it hurts because it matters. And you don't need someone else's permission slip to grieve. This kind of grief often lives in the shadows because there's shame attached. The relationship was complicated. The world doesn't know how to hold space for non-traditional grief, or you just didn't get the support you needed when the loss happened. And so it's been a while, and maybe you didn't have the capacity to grieve right after the loss event. And so it's been a year, 2 years, 5 years, and you're just now starting to grieve what happened, grieve your person. And society doesn't know how to make space for that. So let me be clear. You are not broken. The system around grief is. Your grief doesn't need a socially approved backstory to be real. If it matters to you, it matters, period. I work a lot in the fertility space and have worked with a number of couples and individuals like working around carrying a baby full term. And at some point they get burned out on sharing if they're pregnant or not because people can be so dismissive. And I've had a couple of situations where there was miscarriage and there was a heartbeat at 8 weeks. And then at the 10-week follow-up, there was no heartbeat. And there was just deep grief there. And this one mom just keeps coming to mind. It had been 4 or 5 months post miscarriage, and she was still really struggling and felt irritable and short fused and was just struggling because she didn't have context for how to navigate this miscarriage because it was her first one. And they were so excited, and it felt like this just built this barrier between her and the people around her and not being able to connect with the people closest to her. And so she just felt so isolated and was still so sad and was shaming herself about still being sad. And so we got to talk about it. We got to talk about the fact that there was grief here and there's not a timeline on that grief, and that she got to continue to feel whatever she needed to feel about it and ask for support in whatever way she wanted to experience it. And that got to be okay. I think this disenfranchised grief piece is just so tricky and again, it's people's perceptions of grief being thrust upon us, all of the shoulds, these external drivers that because there's these extenuating circumstances, or there was this, or there was that, we should be over by now. And it's, I just want to say, fuck off. Like, I'm grieving, I'm sad. This person was important, and I'm going to feel how I need to feel about it, regardless of what society needs to feel or say about it. They want to minimize it. And I'm just not going to play that game. So what do you do when the world doesn't recognize your loss? You honor it anyways. Fuck them. You name it. You let yourself feel it, and you find your people, the ones who get it, even if it's just 1 or 2 people, even if they're people in digital spaces. Social media, as many headaches as it comes with, it does have this really beautiful way of connecting people who've experienced similar types of loss. And you can find those people through social media that might be in different parts of the country or the world who see you in your grief and will make space for it and not get burned out, not minimize, because sometimes geographically close people don't get it, or it's too close, or they're in a different space. So we can find people in these digital spaces that can help support us in our grief as well. So here's how to start reclaiming. It out loud. Say, I'm grieving. Even if no one else sees it, you deserve to hear yourself name what you're holding. 2, create your own rituals. Write a letter, light a candle, make a playlist. Doing something to mark the loss because it matters, even if it wasn't public. Go to the graveside if you want. You don't need someone's permission to go there. Talk to them, write them a letter. What would you have wanted that last conversation to be? What would you have wanted them to know, to say to them? You can express that for you. 3, stop waiting for external validation. This one is really hard. I know. Waiting for others to recognize your pain before you let yourself feel it, that just deepens the isolation. You're allowed to feel it. You don't need to wait for someone to see it. You can invite someone in to lean into that lost space with you. And then 4, find grief-informed spaces, grief groups, therapists, coaches, online communities, places where your grief won't be questioned or minimized. Super important. Find those spaces. This is essential when we're trying to heal, right? We can't do it alone. So if you're listening and you're someone who wants to better show up for folks in this kind of grief, here's what I will offer. Don't assume what matters to someone. We know what they say about assuming makes an ass out of you and me. Don't assume what matters to someone. If, they might be having a really strong reaction about a loss, ask, listen, validate. Instead of saying things like, it was just a pet, or you can try again, or what have you, that sounds like a huge loss. Do you want to tell me about them? Instead of, at least it wasn't a full relationship, thinking about situations and things. I imagine that still hurts. What are you feeling right now? Lean in, ask questions, listen. Don't try to fix or rescue. We're not doing that. But we can hold space for story. We can hold space for feelings. Let people tell you what they're grieving, and you don't need to understand it completely to hold space for it. So, as we wrap up this episode, let's drop a couple more truth nuggets. Disenfranchised grief is grief, full stop. You don't need a death certificate or a shared last name to be allowed to mourn. You are allowed to grieve things the world doesn't see, and you're allowed to talk about them anyway. Grief deserves space, even when no one else shows up to hold it. So here is your invitation this week. Give yourself permission to say it out loud. I'm grieving, fill in the blank. And it matters. So I'm grieving my friend, and it matters. And if you're supporting someone else, show up without trying to define the loss. Just be there. So if this episode resonated with you, please feel free to send it to someone carrying that silent grief, or share it and tag me at Grief is the New Normal. We are done keeping grief in the shadows. Remember to take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves today, and we'll see you next time. Take care. That's it for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If this conversation resonated with you, or you think it might benefit someone else, please share it. Sharing can open doors to healing, understanding, and normalizing these griefy conversations. If you're craving deeper insights or ongoing support, consider signing up for the Grief Gap newsletter. It's packed with resources, tips, and personal stories to help you navigate your grief journey. Visit the website www.griefisthenewnormal.com to subscribe. For those who prefer a more personal touch to their healing process, check out my grief journal, Authentically Unapologetic. It's designed to help you explore your grief on your own terms, with prompts and exercises that encourage reflection and growth. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and I look forward to our next meaningful conversation. Our soothing tunes are provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in sharing your story, collaborating, or learning more, please email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. You can also stream the episodes on YouTube for more engaging content. Until next time, keep exploring your grief with intention and support, remembering you don't have to do this alone.